All button. So, welcome. Thank you very much. And of course, the next few minutes of learning that we'll do will be in the zechut, in the merit that that particularly the soldiers in the IDF should be successful. And I wish them bracha and atzlacha. My daughter is actually a choveshet in Totchanim, and she's on the Gaza border, so it's close to my heart, and it's close to all our hearts. My daughter, I really, yeah. So every time I learn something, today included, it should be in the merit of that all the soldiers should have bracha and atzlacha always. So I'd like to spend the next few minutes focusing on the most trustworthy individual in our parsha, Eliezer, the servant of Avram. In chapter 24 of Daled of Bereshis, in this week's parsha, Vayisara, we are told, Vayomer Avraham el Avdoi, Zekam Beisoi, Hameshel L'chol Asher Loi, Sim no Yodecha Tachas Yirechi. And Avram said to his servant, the elder of his household, who controlled all that was his, place now your hand under my thigh. Take an oath. In this pasuk, Avram was asking Eliezer to promise him that he will go and find a wife for Yitzchak. He makes him swear an oath that he will find a worthy girl to marry his son Yitzchak. Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik asks two questions on this pasuk. First one, why are we being reintroduced to Eliezer here in Chayei when we've already been introduced to him in Parshas Lech Lecha, where the Torah said, Vayomer Avram, Hashem Elokim ma titein li v'anechi holech hariri u'v'meshek beisi hu damesek Eliezer. And Avram said, my Lord, Hashem Elokim, what can you give me? And I'm childless, and the steward of my house is damesek Eliezer. So, to recap, the first question is, why are we being reintroduced to Eliezer here in Chayei when we've already been reintroduced to him in Lech Lecha? The second question Rabbi Soloveitchik asks is, if Eliezer was indeed so trustworthy as to be responsible for the immense wealth of Avram, why did Abraham make Eliezer swear that he would find a wife for Yitzchak? After all, he was responsible for so much wealth of Avram's. Rabbi Chaim answers these questions with two scenarios. The first scenario is this. A person comes to a new town looking for somewhere to eat and sees a sign on a shop front which reads kosher restaurant. Now, for some people, this sign would suffice, and they would be happy to eat in that restaurant, trusting that the sign is indeed a true description of the food that they are about to eat. But for others, they would ask to see the hechsher before eating in the restaurant. And then there are those who would go even further and arrange a meeting with the owner of the restaurant, and indeed identify a handful of frum Jews who would all happily eat at that particular restaurant. The second scenario, a person buys a portfolio of properties a fair distance away from where he lives. After several tiring journeys to collect his rent from his tenants, he decides that he needs to appoint a property manager. While on his travels, he sees a shop front which reads property management. Now, would anyone in their right mind simply walk into the shop and hire a manager without first making inquiries about who they are entrusting with the keys to their properties? Taking the two scenarios, how many people would be as scrupulous in inquiring about the kashrus of the restaurant as they are in their inquiries about the property management company? Yet Avraham Avinu's priorities were not like the priorities of many other people. His estate was worth a huge amount, but he wasn't too concerned who ran that estate. However, when it comes to finding a wife for Yitzchak, and thus ensuring the continuity of the Jewish people, Avram wouldn't just trust anyone. He doesn't even wholeheartedly trust his own business manager. So we are introduced to Eliezer again to teach us that here is the same Eliezer who the Torah introduced to us in Parshas Lech Lecha with regards to Avram's estate. But now we are reintroduced to him to show that Avram wouldn't simply trust Eliezer in the same way when it came to finding a wife for Yitzchak, ensuring the future of Klal Yisrael. Therefore, Avram made him swear an oath. The Zerah Shimshon too has an interesting take on the character of Eliezer. Zerah Shimshon is an 18th century Torah commentator. Very interestingly, he had his full name is Rabbi Shimshon Chaim Nachmani, and he had one son, and that son unfortunately passed away while during his lifetime, and he was deeply upset as to who he would pass his Torah on to. So he writes in his will, which is published in both, obviously, the Hebrew Sefer, but also Rabbi Nachman Seltzer's book, 2 books, which he wrote about with excerpts from the Zerah Shimshon. And he said that whoever learns the Torah, there will be many segulas, yeshuas, and refuahs for anyone who learns the Torah. That's a bit of history about Zerah Shimshon. But he too has an interesting take on the character of Eliezer. The Zerah Shimshon asks, why do we need to know that Eliezer was the elder of Avram's household? What's it coming to teach us? What's it coming to teach us? The Zerah Shimshon answers that in truth, this is coming to answer why Avram sent Eliezer to look for a wife for Yitzchak in the first place. In the Gemara Brachos, we are told that servants are generally promiscuous. Now, if you look in that particular Amud of Gemara Brachos, it talks about who can make up a zimun, for benching. And it discusses whether women and servants who are eating together can make up a movement. And one opinion is that it can't because servants are promiscuous. So that's where the Zerah Shimshon gets this from. The Torah therefore goes out of its way to give Eliezer a level of chashivos, of importance, and describe him as the elder, the zokein of Avram's household, a truly prestigious role. The Gemara in Yuma takes it a step further. The Gemara there says that Eliezer sat and learnt Torah in Avram's yeshiva. He was known as Damesek Eliezer because he was goyle or mashke. He drew from the wellsprings of Avram's Torah and poured it out for others, thus teaching them the Torah of his master Avram. We therefore see from this that there can be no question regarding Eliezer. He was a tzaddik and could justly be relied upon to find the wife for Yitzchak. In the same chapter, the Zerah Shimshon continues to discuss the idea of Eliezer learning Torah with his master Avram. We've already learned that Eliezer drew from his master Torah and poured it out, making it accessible for everyone. The Zerah Shimshon, however, asked a question on this idea of Eliezer learning Torah from Avram. The Gemara in Ksubas and the Rambam, in his Hilchos Avodim, teach that it is forbidden to teach your servant Torah. And since we are told that Avram kept all the mitzvahs in the Torah, how could he have disregarded this particular one of not teaching your servant Torah? Answers the Zerah Shimshon. The Torah that Eliezer studied were those laws applicable to a servant. This was indeed allowed because Eliezer needed to know how a servant in a Jewish home should act. And then when he himself had learned the laws of how servants should act, he taught those laws to other servants, thus drawing and pouring for these other servants. Through the wisdom of Reb Chaim Soloveitchik and the Zerah Shimshon, we can conclude that Eliezer was indeed a very special individual, so much so that when Eliezer was praying for help in identifying the right girl for Yitzchak, Hashem answers his tefillos before he has even finished praying. Thank you.
Wanted to match his daughter, Yitzchak. And that was another reason why Abraham made him swear, find somebody more appropriate.
Any other insights? Okay. From an article put into Google, translated, are in a reservist, British citizenship, participated, eating between soldiers, visited lone soldiers, former prime ministers of Great Britain, Australia, Boris Johnson, and Scott Morrison. Conversation with Channel 7, he goes back to the moment when he was called to the reserves a few hours after the start of the war. Working security at the Knesset, I received Order 8. They sent us to the IOS to replace the guys who went down to Gaza. At the very beginning, I understood that we were entering a war against the enemy, and I came with all my strength to contribute where I could. I knew we were coming to a difficult task. I have two brothers here, one in the yeshiva and one in the army in Gaza. Family was very proud of me. My father was a rabbi of the community in London, and the whole community supports us and prays all the time. I am in reserve battalion, which works against terrorism in Judea and Samaria and keeps the peace in the sector. I feel we are fighting for the country and the home so that we don't end up in a situation like it was on October the 7th.
That's your grandson.
On the 7th.
Your name say my daughter against all the soldiers return as soon and we get victory festival over this enemy. Okay, so I will say goodbye to one person on Zoom there, Howard, and we will see you all next week. It'll be a couple of minutes later next week. It's Rosh Chodesh next week, so we'll be a couple of minutes later. I'll do